Hello everyone, and welcome to the third episode of the Blender Story from Zero to Andy's Room course. In this episode, as promised, we will create our first 3D model in Blender. Our first model will be this trash can.
This is awesome.
It might not look very impressive, but it's a great way to practice the skills we've learned so far and serves as an excellent starting point. Plus, we'll learn new techniques in Blender while creating this model. So, let's dive in without any delay. 3D modeling is generally straightforward, at least in theory. You start by choosing a simple geometric 3D object similar in shape to your model. In Blender, this is called a mesh, while in other software, it's known as a standard primitive. By moving the components of this simple geometric mesh, I mean vertices, edges, and faces, the parts that make up the mesh, you can transform it into the 3D model you want. That's it, just by moving, adding, or deleting components. Interesting, right? There are two main workflows for 3D modeling. First, using references. This workflow is divided into two parts: using real-world image references and using blueprint references. When using real-world image references, the artist collects images of the object from different angles. This helps them understand all the perspectives of the object and model it as realistically as possible. This method is particularly useful in visual effects for movies and realistic games where the goal is to recreate reality. But what about projects where the objects don't exist in the real world and there are no images of them? For the projects that have their own world and are stylized, surreal, or imaginary, the artist uses blueprints. Blueprints are simply 2D sketches of the object from different angles, designed by a designer. The 3D modeler uses these sketches to model the object. Sometimes, along with the blueprints, concept art is also provided to give the modeler a deeper understanding of the object, making it easier to model. However, this is not always the case. In some projects where the goal is to recreate reality, blueprints are also given to 3D modelers to simplify the process. Remember, using references is very common, especially for beginners in 3D modeling. The second workflow is Imaginative Modeling, which is less common and considered quite difficult. Usually, in this method, the modeler needs to have prior design experience or a strong understanding of volume and perspective to succeed. It requires design skills and is used when the modeler wants to explore and develop creative ideas by experimenting with object manipulation. But remember, for modeling objects, you definitely need reference images or blueprints. So, if you ever attempt to model something complex like a car without using a reference and find it challenging, don't be too hard on yourself. Alright, the first step is to import our blueprint image into Blender. You can download this file for free from our ArtStation or Gumraod page, which I'll link in the description. The practice files for this course are updated weekly with each new episode. Please download them and come back so we can continue. Alright, now to import the image reference, we use the Add menu. Is it familiar? What shortcut key do we use for the Add menu? Shift plus A, that's right, Shift plus A. Or you can use the Add menu here at the top of the viewport if you prefer, but if you want to look cool, I recommend using Shift plus A. Okay, now in the menu, go to Image and click on Reference. It will ask you to select the image you want to import as a reference. So go to the location where the blueprints are and, for example, double-click on the front view image. Okay, now the image is imported perpendicular to my camera angle. This is a common mistake many people make at the beginning. So I undo with Ctrl-Z, and the correct way to import a reference image is to match the viewport to the angle of the image you want to import. Okay, let's do it. I want to import the front view first. So now, which one is the front view? This is where you need to get familiar with the word navigation gizmo in Blender. The navigation gizmo is like a compass that helps you not get lost in 3D space. When you orbit the scene, it rotates and updates accordingly. It consists of 3 axes, X, Y, and Z, each with positive and negative directions. You'll see that the negative axes are directly opposite the positive ones. Clicking on any of these axes will change your viewport to that angle, allowing you to switch between all the object's angles. To exit this mode, as mentioned in previous episodes, hold down the middle mouse button and move your mouse. To find out which is the front view in Blender, we can use the monkey object. Simply press Shift-A, go to Mesh, and click on Monkey. Now you can see that the monkey's head indicates which axis is the front view in Blender. To go to the front view, click on the negative y-axis. Now you can see that the viewport has changed to the front view. Here at the top, you see the view name is Front Orthographic. Clicking on any of these views changes the viewport to that angle and also enter orthographic mode. For example, if I exit this mode and click on the positive y-axis, the viewport changes to back orthographic. You can also change views using the numbers on the numpad. Note the numpad keys, not the top row keys on the keyboard. The 1 key on the numpad changes the viewport to the front, 3 to the right, and 7 to the top. For the opposite views, hold down the control key with these numbers. So, Control 1 changes the viewport to the back, Control 3 to left, and Control 7 to bottom. It's that simple. The 5 key on the numpad switches between orthographic mode and perspective mode. The numpad numbers on the keyboard are all related to changing the viewport. And I leave it to you to discover the rest of the numbers. Alright, now by pressing the 1 key on the numpad, I switch to the front view. And now let's import the image reference. I press Shift-A, go to the image section, select reference, and here double-click on the front view image. If I exit the front view by clicking the middle mouse button, you'll see that my image now is correctly imported. Great. Now, I'll select this monkey and delete it by pressing the delete key. And remember, you can also use the X key in Blender to delete. The difference is that when you press X, a window pops up and you need to click delete again. Okay? Now, by pressing the 7 key on the numpad, I switch to the top view, and this time I choose the top view image. There we go. And now I'll exit orthographic mode. And to make the modeling easier, let's move these images so they're not in the way. I'll select the image, press the G key for the grab or move tool, then press the Y key to constrain the movement to the Y-axis and move the image back about 5 meters. Or I can type 5. I'll do the same for this image, press G, then Z, and type -5. Okay, now we are all set to start our modeling. But before we begin, let's save our project. To save, go to the File menu at the top, click Save As, or use the shortcut Ctrl-Shift-S. I choose the same folder as the reference images and name it 01_garbagecan_01 and click Save As. Now I feel secure, knowing that if the software closes or I close it myself, everything we've done so far is saved. Now, before starting the modeling process, try to break down your design. Visualize the design in its simplest possible form and pay attention to the features and details. For example, by looking at this design, I can see that I need a cylinder and a torus or a donut-shaped volume to start, okay? For the curved edges at the bottom, I'll probably need to use bevel tool. Your skill in breaking down different parts of the design will improve with practice, modeling various 3D objects, and gaining experience. Eventually, you'll be able to quickly visualize how to model an object just by looking at the design, okay? For now, just follow along with me. I promise that by the end of this course, after modeling all these objects, you'll see real-world objects differently than others do. Alright, to start, I press Shift-A, go to Mesh, and click on Cylinder. Down here on the left, you see a section called Add Cylinder. This panel is called the Adjust Last Operation panel, and it appears with many operations. If I click on it, you can see the properties of this mesh specific to the cylinder. You can change some of its properties at the beginning of creating the cylinder. Note that once you perform another action, you won't have access to this panel anymore. Blender is very serious about this. For example, if I move the object by pressing the G key, you'll see that this window changes to the Move Tool properties and doesn't come back, even if you undo. Blender insists that you decide many things about the mesh before you start manipulating it. Fortunately, not having access to this panel isn't a big deal. Blender offers many tools that allows you to perform these tasks using other methods whenever you need. Now I'll delete the cylinder and create it again. Most of the options here are straightforward and can be understood by simply adjusting them. But one important property is called vertices, which allows you to increase or decrease the number of sides of the cylinder. I'll explain more about vertices later, but for now, set this number to 64 to make the cylinder look smoother. Now, press the 1 key on the numpad to switch the front view and adjust the radius to match the reference image. Okay, and if the values change too quickly while dragging, hold the shift key to make adjustments slower and more precise. Just be careful not to use undo at this stage, as it will close the panel and delete the mesh. However, if you do make this mistake, you can recreate the cylinder and Blender will remember the previous settings, allowing you to continue from where you left off. If you want, you can move the object from the location section here, but using this panel for such tasks isn't common and can make the work a little bit harder, okay? So actually, it's better to use what we learned in previous episodes. You can simply scale the mesh in the axis you need to match it with the reference image. Remember, holding the shift key while using transformation tools slows down the changes, allowing for more precision. So try to memorize this important shortcut. You can also press Alt-Z to toggle X-ray mode, which makes the mesh transparent so you can easily see the reference image behind it. Great! We've created the bottom part of our model. Now you see that the mesh still doesn't look smooth and has faceted shading. To smooth it out, right-click on the object and select Shade Auto Smooth. This makes the shading of the mesh smooth by removing the faceted look. If these steps don't make much sense to you yet, please don't worry and just try to follow along with me. I'll promise everything will make sense later in this course. We'll handle the curved edges later, so don't worry about that. And the next step is to remove the cap of this mesh to make it look more like a trash can, okay? Earlier, when we create the cylinder, there was an option in the Adjust Last Operation panel called Cap Fill Type. Changing it to nothing would remove the cap of the cylinder, but the problem is that both the top and bottom caps would be removed, whereas we only need to remove the top cap, okay? For this, we need permission. Yes, permission to access the components of the mesh. So far, we've been forking in object mode, which you can see here. In this mode, we could only make limited changes to the mesh, such as scaling. But by pressing the tab key, we enter edit mode. Make sure the object you want to edit is selected before pressing the tab key. Like a scientist using a microscope to see more details, you can now see the components of the mesh. If you press tab again, you'll return to object mode. So press tab now, and you'll see the object turns orange with some lines and points on it. These are the mesh components. In edit mode, you'll notice more tools available in the toolbar, and don't worry about the extra tools. You'll learn them over time, and soon they will become your best friends in Blender. The mesh components, as mentioned earlier, are vertex, edge, and face. Up here, you can activate each one, allowing you to select and move that component. Please try to remember the shortcut keys, as you'll use them a lot. The keys 1, 2, and 3 on the top row of the keyboard, and not the numpad, activate vertex, edge, and face selection modes respectively. In the default mode, vertex is active. You can click and drag to select the top vertices, and then use the transformation methods you learned earlier to move, scale, or rotate them. With G, you can move them. With S, you can scale them. With R, you can rotate them. Simple, right? These vertices are the points you saw when we create the cylinder. In the Adjust Last Operation panel, when we set the vertices to 64, we were changing the number of these points. The next component is Edge. Pressing 2 activates it, and you can select the edges you want and transform them just like the vertices. For the Face component, press 3 to activate Face Select mode, and now I come here and select the top cap of the cylinder, then press the Delete key. The delete menu opens here, and don't worry about the other options, just click on faces. Alright, and that's exactly what we wanted to do, right? This simple step removed the cap. Alright, now we want to smooth the lower edges to make them look like our reference. For this, we need to use a tool called bevel. Bevel is usually applied to edges and can shape the edge of the object in various ways. To do this, we need to select the lower edges. Obviously, we don't need to select them one by one. You can hold the Shift key and click on the edges to select them one by one. But this is not practical in this case. We want to select all these edges. So it's better to use click and drag. Just be aware that the camera angle is very important for selecting these lower edges. For example, if my camera angle is like this and try to select this area by clicking and dragging, you'll see that when I orbit the camera, the back edges aren't selected. So be careful with selecting. If I now click and drag from an angle where I can see all the edges, you'll see that all these edges are now selected, okay? Interestingly, in the previous angle, if you activate X-ray mode by pressing Alt-Z and then click and drag in X-ray mode, the edges get selected. So this is another method you can use, okay? Another way is to hold the Alt key and then click on one of these edges, like this. Alright? Just use whichever methods you're comfortable with. And we'll get to know more about selection methods in Blender later. After selecting these edges, we use the bevel tool. Make sure all the edges are selected, press 1 to go to the front view, then press Alt-Z to activate X-ray mode, and now to apply the bevel, position your mouse correctly, just like the previous episode, where mouse position was crucial for the transformation methods. Remember? Alright, move the mouse over the edge you want to bevel, then press Ctrl B to activate bevel, and move your mouse slightly upward. Now, you see the edges are sharp right now, and we need them to be curved and smooth. For this, scroll the mouse to add edge loops. For example, scroll up 5 times and move it down a bit. Now you can see the bevel panel opens, meaning you can still change the bevel setting if you want, and try not to use Ctrl-Z or undo here. Okay, let's get to know some of its more useful options. The first option determines whether the bevel is applied to the edge or the vertices. By changing the width option, you can adjust the bevel area. The segments option determines the number of edge loops, which we controlled with the mouse scroll. And the shape option, if set to 0, applies the bevel internally and in a step-like manner. If set to 0.5, it becomes smooth and curved as we need. And if set to 1, the edge of the object remains unchanged and only adds edge loops to this area, which has its specific use that you'll learn about later. Okay, I set this back to 0.5. Knowing this much about bevel options is enough for now. I suggest you definitely try the bevel tool and see where you encounter problems. If you face any issues, go back and watch this part of the video again to understand where you went wrong. Okay, that's it for beveling the edges. Now I press the Tab key again to return to object mode so I can see the object more easily. As you can see, it looks great. Now it's time to model the protruding edge at the top of this trash can. For this, simply press Shift A and select torus from the mesh section. You'll see that the torus, like the cylinder, has its own properties. By changing the major segments, we can increase or decrease the surrounding edges, and with the minor radius, you can change the vertical edges of the torus. These are quite intuitive options. You can understand their function simply by changing them. I set the major radius exactly the same as the cylinder, which is 64. I want to make the remaining changes without this panel, so just like what we did with the cylinder, I right-click on it and select Shade Smooth. If you click on Shade Auto Smooth, you'll see it doesn't give us the result we want, okay? So just make sure you select Shade Smooth. Now I press 1 on the numpad, then press G and then Z to move this mesh up according to the reference. Next, I press S and move the mouse without selecting any axis to uniformly scale it and match it with the reference. Now, I just need to adjust its thickness. To adjust it, I want to teach you a trick that's very helpful. To change the thickness of this mesh, first go to Edit mode by pressing the Tab key, and it doesn't matter which of the 3 modes you are in, vertex, edge, or face, it doesn't really matter. Just press A to select all the active components. Then, instead of pressing S, press Alt-S, okay? This is actually another type of scale, an alternative scale, which is why you need to hold the Alt key. And this way, you can change its thickness by moving the mouse. Hold the Shift key as well to make the changes slower. This thickness looks good, so I left-click to apply it. Now I press S to scale it uniformly and match it with the reference. Finally, don't forget to save the project by pressing Ctrl S, or you can press Ctrl Shift S to save as. And guys, that's it! Congratulations! This was your first 3D modeling in Blender. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, and once again, I urge you to try making the model yourself to face all the challenges and get the hang of the software. If you encounter any issues, be sure to write in the comments so I can help you. Once again, congratulations, and until next episode, goodbye.